Welcome, everybody, to the Depths of Motherhood podcast. This is a special season dedicated to the tribe of the mother. But also, I know any mothers listening will find this extremely valuable. I've created each episode to offer simple, digestible, and supportive information, which I hope will educate and inspire anyone who listens. So this is by popular demand. Please help us to educate and support the tribe holding the mother. Look forward to passionate and highly knowledgeable guests dedicated to reclaiming the essence of birth and embracing conscious parenting. Throughout our time together, our guests will serve as the guiding voices, illuminating the path towards a deeper understanding of preconception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. This is with the mother and the baby being the center of the exploration. In the show notes, you'll discover the link to Nourished Mother package, which will offer many different resources to complement each episode. This is free for all members in the Women's Circle, or £33 for everybody who just wants to purchase the package. A heartfelt thank you to our incredible guests and immense gratitude to my partner for supporting me on this creation. And finally, last but not least, special thank you to Araya, my daughter, for being the endless well of inspiration. Welcome, everybody. In today's episode, I sit down with Lindsay Courcelle. Lindsay is a myofascial release therapist, holistic pelvic care and heart healing practitioner, a writer, and a mother. She's passionate about guiding women to their highest health and wholeness through deep connection and reprioritizing of self. She's been a body worker and myofascial release therapist for over 10 years and has helped hundreds of female clients nurture their body through their own hands. Today, Lindsay explains about fascia and its role in the body, how it's connected and influences our entire body, not just isolated areas. It also shines light onto why we can have an injury in one place, but it comes to manifest in another place, or when we're experiencing trauma or big emotions, why it comes to play out through the physical body. So we can come to understand how our life experiences are held within our body and the ways in which we can come to support ourselves through the releasing of fascia in the body. And we can do that at home. And she actually shares a really simple and effective tool that we can start using today. I love this conversation so much because it brings back that inspiration to come back to the body and also to interact with the people I love, to offer them hands-on work, to come into communication with their body through my hands. And what I love about this practice is it's calling for slowness. It's calling for us to tune into our intuition, to really listen to the other person's body. And through a gentle pressure, we can offer a gift. And right at the end of this conversation, we go on to talk more deeply about trauma and emotions and memories held within the body and what might be experienced whilst we're having a myofascial release. So a huge thanks to Lindsay, who at the time of recording was 7 months pregnant. And she went on to give birth to a beautiful girl called Serena Rue. So hopefully one day we can get that birth story on this podcast. I would love to listen to that story. All right, we're almost there, ready to listen. I want to invite you to our online women's circle happening on the 27th of October. We are doing a live womb massage and water of the womb meditation. It is free or donation. You can find the link in the bio. All right, are we ready? Let's take a deep breath, adjust our spine, soften with every exhale. Maybe bring in some beautiful movement to the pelvis, circular motions or rocking back and forth. Let's come to land in our precious body to receive this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Me too. I have just been sat with two other mothers and we've been talking about myofascial release and how it seems to be a buzzword almost, but like there's so much information. And so I feel like we were saying it's a little bit overwhelming sometimes. And I was like, don't you worry.
Mm,
I'm going on a podcast episode with Lindsay. I'll ask her everything. So I'll report back tomorrow.
perfect. I was actually just thinking today about how much I hear fascia talked about now. When I started doing this work 10 years ago, it was so foreign. And I know for a lot of people, it's still a brand new thing, or there might be some questions around it. But I do feel like it's a bit of a buzzword. It's just used in so many more circles, I feel like, than it used to be. So it's exciting for me to just have more awareness around it.
Yeah, myofascia and like trauma, them two words together, it's
Yeah.
like everywhere. So let's unpack it. I'm excited. But before we do, would you like to share a little bit about how you got into doing the work you're doing? And yeah, what inspires you to show up to do this?
Yeah, sure. I have always been interested in the human body and always had some curiosity around us as humans, as beings, like what is going on inside of us. And so I think that was always there. My dad's side of the family had this religion of Christian Science, which I still don't even really know that much about, but kind of the way I absorbed it was this idea that our bodies are sort of perfect as they are, and that it was maybe a more holistic thinking around what to do if we aren't well. And so I was kind of already a little bit on that path just from childhood. Like we didn't take a lot of medications and things like that. And then as I got older, my husband and I met and we started an organic vegetable farm. And I really loved that, but I still was having pain in my body. And I was starting to notice this was in my early to mid 20s. And I started to notice the patterns that had formed in my body from mostly emotional traumas that I'd experienced in my life. I had a pretty unstable childhood with a lot of love from my parents. So it wasn't that I was unloved, but I just had a lot of moving around and witnessing kind of unstable relationships. And that really I could feel as I was in my 20s and starting to kind of want to make a home and a life for myself. I was really struggling with how do I sink into stability and feel comfortable with stability? And so that was kind of going on in the background. I decided after a couple years farming that I wanted to go to massage school and just kind of have a different career. Like my husband was way into the farming and I loved a lot of things about it, but I just knew it wasn't my life. And so I went to massage school and then like getting tons of body work and feeling like still I had this pain and noticed more of these patterns and understood more of how whatever we experience in our life is sort of held in our bodies. And not that long after that, my husband and I got married. And the year after, or not even the year we were married, just a couple months after we were married, I was still having these feelings of actually just kind of like wanting to flee. Like it was a flight sort of nervous system reaction. And consciously, I knew that I wanted to be with my husband. I knew I wanted to live where we did, like all the good things. But in my subconscious, there was this feeling of like, oh, this is not safe, or this doesn't feel comfortable to be stable. And right around that time, I found a brochure in my mailbox for myofascial release. And I was like, I think I'm meant to study this. I booked a session with someone who is a therapist, a myofascial release therapist. And within a very short amount of time in my first session, like a few minutes, I was just sobbing and could feel that so much was moving through me. And I was already someone that I'd never had problems expressing my emotions. That was something that was modeled to me as a child, which I'm so grateful for because I do feel like that's part of my life's work is to help people feel more comfortable expressing emotions. I just suddenly had so much coming out of me. And I really felt from that moment on like that was work that I was meant to be doing. So I really dove right in and started taking a lot of trainings in myofascial release with my teacher, John Barnes. I just fell in love with it. Over the years, I've kind of, as I've unpacked my own experiences in life, a lot of which have to do with being a woman and reproductive health and my pelvis. It's like wherever my traumas were, I kind of started to feel like, oh, I had these experiences happen to me because I'm meant to hold this space for other women that are doing this healing. And so I started to do more of the internal pelvic work and really feel like drawn to being a space holder for women that want to heal themselves in that way, and working with the breasts and just kind of like working with the parts of the body that are just ignored way too often. And so, yeah, did I answer the question? That's
Oh,
kind
that
of how
was
I got into
beautiful.
what I'm doing. Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And
Yeah.
as you speak, there's things that I resonate with, and I can feel myself so excited to figure out, like, wow, there might be something new that I can include in my life, that I can explore a little bit more deeply. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing your story and this path to getting where you are today to help other people. It's incredible. What is myofascia and what is its role in the body? Let's unpack this buzzword so we can understand a little bit more
Yeah.
about ourselves.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Myofascial, myo is generally referring to muscle, and then
Mm,
fascia. So myofascia. When I'm talking about what's the tissue in our body, I'm usually just calling it fascia, but the name of the technique I use is myofascial release. And so our fascia is essentially really our whole body. It's like runs through and between every single cell of our body in a continuous web from head to toe and front to back and top to bottom, all through our body. And it really surrounds all of your muscles and bones. It supports all of your organs. It just is so much of the tissue of our body. And for a long time, it was really ignored because the way that modern medicine was formed was studying cadavers. And in a cadaver, fascia looks really different. In a living being, it's very fluid, very dynamic. It's this liquid crystal, highly structured water, sometimes called the fourth phase of water because it's in between a liquid and a solid. These qualities, like a crystal, where it can conduct electricity. In a cadaver, it was more often just kind of scraped away to see the smaller structures underneath. But in a living person, it's this very dynamic and fluid tissue that kind of looks like there's now been a French hand surgeon who's taken a little camera and gone under the skin and shown what it looks like. And it really looks like almost like a dew covered spider web with everything in between the strands of the spider web is also liquid, but these strands slide along each other, glide, and they'll disconnect and reconnect elsewhere. It's just like this really beautiful and amazing thing that's going on in our bodies. And we can get restrictions in our fascia through all sorts of things. It could be like chronic poor posture, surgery, just any sort of accident or injury, any sort of impact, also emotional trauma. And when we have these restrictions, the tissue sort of solidifies. We can get more into the emotional, also physically. The tissue, it's like when we have a bad fall, the tissue sort of builds up really quickly as a way to compensate and repair. And then that tissue is much more solid. And so we might have a restricted range of motion and not be able to move as well, or it just might prevent the flow of energy where suddenly parts of our bodies don't feel as connected. And we can release that through myofascial release. And myofascial release is very simple, where it's just this gentle, sustained pressure. And so by putting pressure into the fascia and holding there, so finding this barrier and waiting there for at least a few minutes. So it's a long hold. It can be like 10 minutes per hold. What will happen is something called piezoelectricity or pressure electricity. So, with the pressure of myofascial release, with this gentle, sustained pressure, we hold the tissue and we always just go to a barrier. We don't force through, and then we wait there. So, it's often I feel like my hands are kind of listening to the body, listening to the tissue, and feeling this liquid, feeling this water under my hands, under the skin. And as we put pressure there, this piezoelectricity or pressure electricity creates this electrical charge and then the phase changes. So what was more solid becomes this liquid crystal again. And we can feel this fluidity in our bodies when we're working on ourselves, like under our own hands. And we can feel it as practitioners when we're working on other people. We can feel it become more fluid. And often, a very common thing people say after receiving a treatment is that they just feel lighter. And it's like, whatever this like heavy weighing down feeling is just suddenly gone. Like it's just this lightness and it's so amazing. Yeah.
That's really incredible. Absolutely fascinating. And I'm curious if you're talking about like this solid going more to a liquid, is that to do with the fascia? Is the fascia making that transition? So, say if there is an injury, is it that there's a firmness coming through the fascia, or is it from the tissue still? Or is it a bit of both?
Yeah, I mean the fascia is the tissue. So it's like this, it's solidified in a way that I think often when I think of emotional or any, I mean physical or emotional trauma, I think what happens is like our body gets overwhelmed by the response we're having, the emotional response we're having, and we have to just kind of shut it down. And that all becomes solid somehow. I mean, I don't exactly know how, but it's like this solid mass. And then when we're doing this work, sometimes the memories will come up and it does move back to this more fluid and liquid state.
So it like
It's
becomes like
like,
an armor almost, like a protection.
yeah, totally. I think that's a perfect way of describing it. I don't know exactly why or what the science is behind that, except that I know sometimes in our repair, we're just laying down these layers of collagen, and
Mm.
that's one part of fascia. You can think of when you have a cut or a surgical scar, what that looks like with this little camera that this French surgeon, his name's Jean-Claude Gimberteau, has shown what a scar looks like. And it's like much more solid and white and dense
Mm.
than just the rest of the healthy tissue. And so it's like as our body's repairing a cut, which like we know that if we're going for surgery, there's hopefully a good reason for that. But our body needs to repair really quickly. And so it's like it just layers everything up quickly as it can to kind of pull the tissue back together. So that's, I love working with scars too, because you can really feel that change.
I'm going to ask you so
Yeah.
many questions about that in a minute. It's fascinating. So you've used the word trauma a few times. I would love to hear, like, how would you describe what trauma is? Because this is another word that is used, just almost sounds like music now because it's in every sentence. But how would you describe trauma on a physiological way? What is happening in the body?
Yeah. I think it's really just the emotional response to an event, and their emotional reaction is what would guide whether it ends up being quote traumatic. And so if we have this kind of overwhelmed feeling and we can't emotionally digest what's happening to us in a moment, that is what I would consider trauma. So you this could range from obviously like something like a sexual assault to something like what I was thinking about earlier today for some reason is when my son was 2, I watched him fall through a screened window. He fell like 6 feet. He was fine, but it was so traumatic for me because in that moment, I didn't know if he would have died. Like it was just so traumatizing. And also in that moment, I had to go and find him. And I knew where he was. Obviously, he fell out of a window, but I had to go and find him and gather him up and hold him and let him nurse and work on him. And it wasn't like in that moment I could just let myself sob and weep out of the terror that I felt, So, like, that can be trauma. And for me, it's not like anything really happened to me in that moment except that I had this emotional reaction that was just like, oh my God, what if something really serious happened to my son in this fall? So it can be smaller things too. The more I do other work as well called heart healing, which is more working with the subconscious. And I've had a lot of people have these moments in childhood where, like, maybe they saw their father have a moment of a big temper and like they broke a glass or something like that. And in that moment as a child, like those emotions are so intense. And so it has to go somewhere. If we can't let it out, if we can't let it fully express itself, it goes into this somehow solidifying and kind of, I mean, I just think of it as like what we're swallowing down because we can't let it out. And even if we can let some of it out, sometimes there's so many different layers to these events that we experience. I feel like some of it starts to solidify somewhere in our body. In terms of where it solidifies, I think with a more physical trauma, there might be a clearer idea of like, oh, he hit his head, so there's some solidification there. But I think it can also really extend to the whole body. The thing about the fascia is you can have pain in one part of your body or have an impact to one part of your body, and it can actually be stemming from a totally different part of your body because we are entirely connected. So when I think of things like emotional trauma, it's really interesting to me, like, where does that get stored? And sometimes if we've had an injury or something physical happen close to the time of the more emotional trauma, it seems like it finds that place. It finds that little bit of like a weak spot and gets stored there. But I don't think that's always the case. From my experience and like what I've seen with my clients, it doesn't seem like there's necessarily an easy answer as to where you're going to find it being stored.
So how does that work when you're working with somebody and
Yep.
they're telling you the story and you're figuring out the injuries and they're there in front of you? How do you start to locate where you need to be putting your focus, where you need to be doing the work?
Yeah, I guess the easy answer is I just follow my intuition, which sometimes guides me right to a spot, and other times I'm always keeping a really broad perspective of their whole body and just knowing it's been really important for me in these 10 years I've been doing this work to just get to a place of realizing that I am not going to necessarily figure it out with my thinking brain. And that often, if I just soften my focus and start on a place of their body where I can either feel drawn to that place, or sometimes I can kind of see, I don't know how to describe it, like a fuzzy sort of energy around a part of their body. It might work there, or it might just be based on what they're telling me. Like sometimes it's easy to think of where some of the work should be. But yeah, there's not really a super simple answer to that. It's just we really all need work like on our entire body is the answer. And
Yes, the entire
we
body.
might, yeah, and we might just be surprised where we're holding on to things.
I see. So it's not necessarily that, say, if something happened to me, what comes to mind is like, I'm holding grief right now and I feel it in a certain place. It might be there for the work to be done, but it actually might not be. That might just be like the first point,
Yeah.
and then you kind of go on a journey through your body. It makes me think about modern medicine, which is so focused on what's being presented, and then everything else gets
Mhm.
forgotten about. And it's just like this single point of focus on this one area. What about everything else? Because we are so connected. And I
Absolutely.
think with this new information, because I feel like fascia is pretty new to the medical world in terms of where people are
Yeah.
going with this, right? Like it's not like been around forever, this information. And so it's like starting to
No,
discover, wow, what is it and how does it connect all parts of us? And it's brilliant. Big shout out to our sponsor, Evolving Humans, who are the pioneers for energy healing. This practice that I was taught 4 years ago has been studied by researchers all around the world to provide evidence of the physiological effects of energy healing. And I'm not just saying this because it's a promotion, but I have used this practice every single day for 4 years, and personally, I've noticed the most impact in my emotional state. This energy practice taught me how to feel energy in my body and observe the sensations The technique involves you using your hand and connecting to the energy field within your body. And with this gentle, loving awareness that you bring to the table, everything is seen and lived. The whole being comes into alignment. During the birth of my daughter, I tore, and the discomfort that I was experiencing with this tear started to ease up dramatically when I would use this technique. In the show notes, you'll find the link to Evolving Humans so that you can explore this healing technique, which is available through a course that you can join today.
All parts of us. And it's brilliant, right? Because it's now we are holistic beings. Like, of course we know
Yeah.
that, but as science catches up, makes everything a little bit more easy for the mind to like soften into these practices like the ones that you're offering as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I know that myofascial release at least has been around since the 60s or 70s, and there were definitely people studying fascia long before that. But in terms of, talking about it in a modern in
Mm,
our modern medical system, I mean, I think it's probably not being taught about that thoroughly in medical school.
yeah.
And this is a problem in our healthcare system, is just that there's all these different specialties, which we need. We need someone who's a urologist, for example, but if they're not thinking of the whole system, then I think they're missing a big part of the puzzle. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely an issue for me as well. Like, I know my own bias is going to be when someone tells me something, I'm going to be thinking about it from a fascial perspective. I don't believe that myofascial release is the answer to everything, but I
Mm,
do think that it's a great perspective to have when looking at the body, to think about how we're so connected. Because I will have people say things to me that at this point, 10 years in, I'm like, how are people still not seeing the connectedness? And I get it, but it's like a woman
mm.
who had a lump removed from her breast, and then she has neck pain. And I'm like, well, your breast and your neck are only a matter of inches apart, like, of course there could be a connection there. But for them, they're like, but how could it be connected? And I'm like, well, I don't know how to describe this in
Yeah,
more detail, but like, that's how much we've been conditioned to think of the parts of our body as separate. When in
it's
reality, we are connected from head to toe by a matter of 5 or 6 feet. It's not like it's that crazy to think that something going on in our head is going to affect our feet, really.
Yeah, exactly. I was watching the river flow by our house the other day, and there's some rocks in the river, and they're like making blocks, like blocking the river or changing the path. And so you would never think, oh, if there's a rock at the top, it wouldn't affect the bottom of the river. You just know that it would in some way pass, trickle down. And it's less like our body, right? It's just, we just have this thing switches off when it comes to it
Yeah.
because we've been taught to look at the body in sections. Even I went through nursing school like 12 years ago, and we did not get taught about fascia. I went on to do sports massage, and kind of it was the word that was dropped in, but there wasn't a lot of information
Mhm.
about it at all. And so for me, like I knew something was up. I knew when we were like dealing with a knee injury and not looking at other parts of the body that there was something off there. It just felt intuitively out of place. Oh my gosh, I could
Yeah.
talk to you about this forever. So I'm going to ask you, what are some methods or techniques that can be used to release tension in fascia?
Yeah, or restriction, but I think
Mm,
tension is a fine word to use as well.
yeah.
So for people to do the treatment for themselves.
Yeah, like I know
Yeah.
you explained before about putting the pressure down and
Mhm.
to release you need time. And if people are doing it at home, how would you say they could be like they guide themselves into doing this? Is there a way to just begin
Yeah.
doing something right today, right now? As you're
Totally.
listening.
Yes, there absolutely is. The techniques are just so simple because if you follow these principles, you can do this anywhere on your body. So, for the most part, with myofascial release, the principles are this gentle, sustained pressure. So, finding a barrier. So, like if you visualize, I'm trying to think of what the easiest thing to describe is. Well, I'm guessing you have mostly women listening to this. So, I'll describe it with the breast because I think this is a part of the body that I want every woman to work with. So, if you take your breast tissue and essentially gather it up. It's easier with two hands, but if you only have one, if you can kind of gather up the tissue of your breast and pull it away from your body just until you feel the first bit of a barrier. And then you wait there for 3 to 5 minutes, even 10 minutes. Another way you could do this if you have one hand and you're working with your breast is sort of pulling from the outside of your body, pulling your breast in towards your sternum, towards the center of your body, and extending that arm out so that you're creating a stretch between your breasts and like down your arm and kind of extending your arm, like reaching it as far as you can reach. And then again, just you're not pushing it hard. Like you really want it to be gentle. Less is always more. And then just holding there for 3 to 5 minutes. It's so, so simple. And it's this sort of technique that is used everywhere on the body. Doing internal pelvic work, that's less of a pull and more putting compression into a spot. So letting your fingers sink in and staying there for 3 to 5 minutes. Again, just connecting with the tissue, not pushing, not forcing. Those are kind of the biggest principles are like gentle, never forcing, and finding the first bit of a stretch or the first bit of what feels like a barrier, like where your fingers suddenly are like, oh, and you're a body worker, so you get it. Even people that aren't body workers, it's pretty easy. It's more likely that people will kind of overdo it. So that's why I always give the advice to just be really gentle. The first bit of a stretch, the first bit of what feels like tenderness, you can just wait there. And then your fingers might sink in more deeply over those 3 to 10 minutes. But really, what happens is at like about a minute and a half, there's one part of your fascia, the elastic part of your fascia starts to release. And this is what's mostly accessed through shorter stretches that are more typical stretches that you think of. And then after a few minutes, the collagen or the collagenous part of your fascia starts to release. And when that happens, that's when you feel more of that fluidity coming back. And then the longer you wait, there's like this chain of reactions that happens. I know one of the things is around 8 minutes, our body releases its own anti inflammatory. So if you're in pain and you can wait 8 minutes, it's like your body knows what to do at that 8 minute mark. And even 10, like if you can just wait longer and you'll feel it release on all these different levels, I guess I would say. So at first it might be tender and then it might lessen and then it might be tender again and then lessen again. And it's like you're just peeling back the layers of the onion.
I feel like I've just learnt more with you in 5 minutes than I did in 3 years of massage school.
Yeah, I know we didn't really cover fascia that much in massage school either. Like it was a very short lesson, and I did not leave with anywhere near the same understanding I have now.
It's incredible, right? And even when I was just sat doing it with one hand, I can feel it go across my body to the other side. I can feel that crossover. I can imagine the challenge for people doing it alone is the focus of the mind because our mind is so
Yeah,
switched on because it's like a meditation. And I
it
know,
really is.
oh, it's like to be there to breathe. It's like we have
Yeah,
to get into our body, and it is such a practice. It's almost like yin yoga in a way, getting into them positions and
absolutely.
holding it, right?
Yeah,
Ooh.
I think it's very similar. And I think yin yoga is working with the fascia. And you're absolutely right. The hardest thing for people in our modern society is just to be that patient, which is such a good life lesson.
Mm.
This isn't something that can happen quickly. That's why on social media, I don't really share a whole lot of these techniques because I'm like, well, the reality is you need to do this for this amount of time. And that's really the only way you're going to feel what a release feels like.
Yeah, they only have 15 seconds focus on social media. I think that's what's
Yeah.
seen. So there's no way. And it's also making me think back to my postpartum phase. And I went for a massage, and I kind of felt like she was going through a system, like that she had learned. It felt
Mhm.
like a robot, and she wasn't listening to my body at all. And I actually left that place crying because I felt like she hadn't seen me, she hadn't
Oh,
witnessed me, she hadn't listened to my body. But also, I felt so sad that I hadn't used my voice. And I was just like a few days postpartum, and I was like shaming on myself, like, why didn't I say stop?
oh.
But I feel like this kind of practice is not only just to learn about fascia, but it takes us to see the human being and feel the human being in front of us. And also, like you said, tap into our intuition. Like what that is just the greatest gift. So if we're doing
Yeah.
this with people at home, our loved ones, our partner, our children, wow, you really get to connect on a deeper level. And it doesn't have to be so like, okay, we're going to sit and meditate together and look each other in the eyes. It's like, I'm going to
Yeah.
feel your body, your energy, and see where my hands want to flow. And I feel super inspired right now to do it myself with my partner. He'll be listening downstairs like, I'm gonna I'm gonna say, I heard you. We're doing it later.
Oh, it's so amazing. I especially love working with my husband because we just have so much resonance with each other that
Mm,
the releases happen really quickly. And that's really what it is just finding resonance with another human being. Like literally, we're just vibrating at the same frequency. And
yeah.
I'm so curious. I mean, I would be so curious what if you talked with some of the elders in your community
Mm,
down in the Sacred Valley. I have this thought that there must have been healing work done like this for millennia, like where people just put
mm,
their hands on someone's body and they essentially just listened and waited
yeah.
and felt what came up and were
Mm,
present with that person and giving love through their hands. And I'm
yes.
curious if anyone would be able to confirm that. But like, this is always if I have parents, and eventually I'm going to teach a parent child class because I just feel like anyone can do this. It's not like,
Yes.
I mean, yes, it's easier for me having 10 years of experience doing this, but any parent can take their hands and put them on their child and literally just think loving thoughts and
Yes.
be present with their child and have a huge release happen. It's just like
Yeah.
it's not rocket science. It's very simple.
It is. It's like coming back to presence, right? It's like a practice
Yeah.
back to feeling because I'm holding my daughter right now. She's fallen asleep, but I can feel that my pressure of my arm is like gently pressing the back of her neck and upwards. So naturally, I'm like doing this release for her. And the way she moves her body into me to put pressure and lean, it's like she's naturally putting herself into position to have them releases as well. And I'm curious if you know much about like the for teeth, for example, because there's a lot like happening around, let's so speak for myself, but like I have a tension around my jaw a lot. I wake up in the night and I'm clenching my
Mhm.
teeth. I'm also prone to cold sores. You might see that I have a cold sore. So I feel that maybe that's a place that I need to work on because there maybe is some like rocks in the river there, like if I'm getting
Yeah.
that tightness in the nighttime.
And how about your pelvic health? Because so
Mm.
often the jaw and the pelvis are related. So that would be my other question.
That's good. Yes.
And so,
There's
and you're, and this is your youngest, this is your only child or your
one.
youngest? Yeah. So you're 3 years postpartum, you're just coming back into your body,
Mm,
like, I mean, for me, at least 3 years is what it has felt like it's taken for me to really kind of regain my energy or I'm not
yeah.
exactly sure how to say that, but especially in my pelvis, like my creative fire.
Mm,
And you might not feel that way, and maybe it's quicker for some people, but yeah, absolutely in your jaw, similar sort of just putting gentle pressure on the places where you feel the tension. You can do it also inside your mouth.
mm,
And I have a class, the head, neck, and jaw, that's all
ooh,
focused on this part of the body. Also, your pelvis. Really just
mm,
if
wow,
you're a
yeah.
few years postpartum, if there's any dysfunction, if anything is not quite right, or postpartum, what I think of with women at like 3 years postpartum, if you don't feel like a libido much, or if you have any sort of incontinence where you're leaking at all, or any discomfort with your bleeds, things like that, like
Hmm.
just doing some internal work in your
Wow, yeah.
pelvis, you might feel it release in your jaw. So,
Oh,
and
thank
vice
you for bringing
versa,
that up.
but that's definitely like jaw and pelvis they so
Oh,
mirror each other.
they're the places
Yeah,
that we don't
that's
really get inside to touch and put pressure on, especially even
yeah.
sexually. It's like for so many, it's like in and out and like, let's get the job done. So, do you work a lot with, or have you been working with women prior to giving birth and afterwards? And could you share how these practices have supported them through childbirth and into postpartum as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I'm just talking about all these classes I have, but I am 7 months pregnant
Go
right
for it.
now.
Oh, you are?
And
Oh
I
my
am,
gosh.
yeah, and thank you.
Congrats.
This is my third baby. And with my first, that was basically the year I found myofascial release and was when I was pregnant with my first baby. Did a lot more with my second baby, tending to my womb space, doing kind of uterine massage and things like that. And had such different experiences from the first to the second from incorporating more myofascial release, and I would say beyond myofascial release, like really focused on my womb health and uterus and internal pelvic work. And so, yeah, absolutely. Like, I feel like another thing with giving birth is the biomechanics of birth and like how the baby enters the birth canal, how the baby can turn. Is there space in your belly for the baby to grow? Working with women really regularly in their pregnancy, I definitely feel like it improves. I can't say for sure that it improves the outcome because I don't know what their experience would be like otherwise, but I've had women have really great outcomes and definitely feel more comfort in their bodies through pregnancy. So, certainly these are things you can do yourself. I think the internal pelvic work is really key when you're pregnant. For me, that's been in this pregnancy, that's been the thing that has, if I have any discomfort, like for example, in my sacrum and SI joint, if I work internally, it goes away entirely. Um, so definitely, but like your whole body, like one of the things I really like to use is this little therapy ball. I think I've got one right here. It's a squishy ball that's like bigger than a tennis ball, softer than a tennis ball, and you can just lay on it. And so like some people use a wool dryer ball, but anything like that. I also have one friend who she'll go to the river and like lay on a rock and just like let that put pressure into her tissue for 3 to 5 minutes. I think for me with pregnancy, like this is a really easy tool to have to just lay on. It's not like a foam roller where it's really hard. It's just this nice soft, like just putting gentle pressure into your tissue to allow it to release. And I do think it does really positive things for birth. I will also say that what I've learned from a friend of mine who's a Mayan abdominal massage therapist, just around massaging the belly daily, which for me is really kind of, since I'm on video, I'll just show you like, so like the bowl here, the bony part of the pelvis, just kind of pulling up from all the areas of that bony part of the pelvis to the belly button. Doing that every day feels really critical for me for my own just comfort through pregnancy and what I know will help me in labor. And then postpartum, all of it, really all of it. But I think so many women just need, like, I remember with my daughter, she's 8, and I had her at a birthing center with midwives, but I was induced with Pitocin, and it was very challenging experience for me. Not what I wanted my birthing experience to be. I didn't have any pain relief and it was so intense. And I tore pretty badly. I was stitched really poorly. So that now, even just in recent months, I've learned that some of my internal tissue is now sort of external. Like I had a friend who's a midwife and she was like, oh, yeah, this should have been kind of closed differently. Luckily, I don't have any major dysfunction from it, but I was so like checked out of my body after that experience. And really, that's what the birthing portal is like we have to kind of almost like step out of our bodies in order for this being to come through. And I remember seeing an image of this, I can't remember where, in a book after I'd given birth. And I was like, oh my God, that is exactly what I felt like, where just like all my energy went outside of my body so that I could be this portal essentially. And what I asked my husband to do in those days right after I gave birth to my daughter was to just put his hands around my womb space, like one hand on my sacrum and the other hand right on my, like where my uterus is. And I just intuitively drew the energy back into my body, and I could feel my energy just coming back into myself. And I think so many women need that. Like, I'll work on women, months postpartum. Like, maybe they've come to me for the first time many months postpartum, and they still need that because it's like they just haven't had this time to really have someone hold them and let themselves kind of just draw the energy back in. That's the best way I can describe it. I mean, I know there's all sorts of like closing of the bones ceremonies and things like that, but I think it can also be as simple as that, where it's just that presence, has someone with presence, and then just drawing your own energy back into your body and kind of reabsorbing it in your cells so that you can be there and be present as a mom to your children.
Thank you for sharing all that. It was beautiful, beautiful insight. And it's so great to hear stories as well, because you can really connect through people sharing their experience and like what is coming through. And I know I've taken so much of your time up, but it's super interesting. I wondered if you could share last few tips, if there's anything that we can do to like nourish our fascia. If is it all about massage release, or is there nutrients or other things that we can do to support it?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like my primary way of knowing how to support it is through my myofascial release. And my teacher, John Barnes, is pretty hilarious because he'll just be like, it doesn't matter what foods you're eating, if your fascia is restricted, it's like he drinks like Diet Coke and eats meatball subs. And I'm kind of like, okay, well, that's not really my style. Like, I'm more into eating a really good diet and things like that. But some of the things that you can do are just getting natural sunlight, limiting EMF, like limiting wireless sort of technology. Those sorts of things affect. There's this easy water, which is it's exclusion zone water, which kind of encompasses or like runs through your fascia and is where the charge happens. And I'm not going to do a great job of explaining it, but basically, like, in order to have this exclusion zone water, which people can look up and research more, you definitely need the things that like you would generally think of as being health promoting. Like, you need natural sunlight, you need to avoid being on screens all the time, you can avoid things like glyphosate and toxic metals, like the things that we all know are kind of toxic, but those do actually affect your fascia. So staying hydrated with high quality water, which I'm not an expert in at all, but like drinking good water, staying hydrated, and those are kind of the main things I can think of how to support your fascia.
That's
And
great. So it's just like
yeah,
thinking what things nourish us, basically, and what
yeah,
things don't.
I think so. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And
Yeah.
I've just found this so fascinating and also extremely inspiring. I can feel myself like touching my daughter now, like around her back, and just feeling that, like, and this is the beauty, like when baby comes along, they're in your arms a lot of the time. So you get to
Yeah.
practice. And I know it's like, it's tough sometimes, right? Well, I speak for myself, but like just having my first and like still being over the bridge, from maiden to mother and wanting to do stuff and not just sit there and,
Mhm.
be
Mhm.
with baby all the time, but just like having that inspiration to feel is like, wow, it does something, it's magic. So thank
Yeah,
you.
doing your own treatment on your own body and
Mm,
working on your baby are things you can easily do while you're, breastfeeding. I love with kids, like one hand on the sacrum. If you can have a hand on the sacrum,
mm,
there's so much. I mean, it's such a sacred bone. And
mm.
if you can have the other hand up on the head too and kind of feel that connection between the head and the
Oh,
sacrum, that's
yeah.
really special. But yeah, anywhere that you can do it is going to be beneficial. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for being here with
Um,
us. And I would love for you to share where the listeners can find you and what you're offering online.
Yeah, so easy to find me online at lindsaycourcelle.com, or my Instagram is at Lindsay Courcelle. And I'm teaching my myofascial breast course again
Mm.
in April, on April 20th. And this is a really special class because it's not massage, it's myofascial release. And there are studies that have proven that cancerous cells can revert back to normal, healthy cells through myofascial release, specifically in the breast. So it has a
Mm.
big, deep place in my heart. And then I'm going to teach a pregnancy class before this pregnancy is over, and working on a parent-child class and an infant class and lots of other things. But all of it can be found online on my website. And yeah, I would love it for people to connect with me and let me know any questions they have too.
Thank you so, so much. And I'm going to put all the information in the show notes as well. And I think I've got a bit of work to do myself tonight because as I just got my daughter from the toilet, I bloody fell down the steps. So I'm like, ah, damn, I
Oh
just felt
no.
that go from my ankle to my hip. So I'm
Oh,
going to get this released tonight. I'm going to get my partner to do it.
good. That's perfect. Yeah.
Wiping
Get some
butts is
help.
dangerous sometimes, I tell you.
It is.
In more ways than
Oh,
one.
that's great. Yeah. Well,
Thank
thank you so
you.
much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.